signal came through at 0300 hours, station time. Not a distress call. Not a warning. A surrender demand. From us. Commander Yara Ose read it twice. The Veth'kai delegation had transmitted the terms directly to her personal console, bypassing Fleet Command entirely, which meant they knew Fleet Command was already gone. How long? She said, not looking up from the screen. Behind her, Specialist Davo Reinhold pulled at the skin of his knuckle the way he always did when the math was bad. 41 minutes before their second wave clears the debris field. 41 minutes. She finally looked up. Through the viewport, the wreckage of 3 Veth'kai dreadnoughts drifted in slow, burning spirals, beautiful. If you didn't know what it had cost to put them there. 1,400 humans. Gone. And that had only been the distraction. They're offering terms, said Lieutenant Priya Bassi from the navigation console. Her voice was careful, controlled, the kind of voice people used when they were managing themselves from the outside in. Full crew preservation. Station intact. We submit and they reclassify us. Reclassify us as what? Priya didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. Yara turned back to the screen. The Veth'kai communication was elegant. She had to admit, their language was constructed almost entirely from harmonic ratios, and even in translation it had a kind of mathematical beauty. But the word Priya was avoiding, the word buried in line 7 of the treaty language, was kel'vorath. Property, not slaves, not prisoners. The Veth'kai didn't have a concept for those. Kel'vorath was closer to incorporated resource. Humans would be folded into the Veth'kai continuance the way a river was folded into a reservoir. Still water. Still present. Just no longer going anywhere on its own. Ma'am, that was Corporal Gene Sook at comms. Young. 22, maybe. He had a small drawing of a dog, his dog, she assumed, taped to the edge of his console. I'm picking up something on the long-range array. It's faint, but... Put it through. Static. Then beneath the static, something rhythmic. Something almost structured. That's not Veth'kai, Priya said. No, Gene said slowly. It's not. Yara crossed the deck in 4 strides. She leaned over his console, listening. The signal had a pulse to it, irregular, but intentional. She'd heard signals like this exactly once before, in a classified briefing she wasn't supposed to have attended, from a woman whose name she'd been told to forget. Her stomach went cold in a completely different way than it had 30 seconds ago. Lock it down, she said quietly. Don't log it. Don't route it anywhere. Gene looked at her. Commander, protocol says. I know what protocol says, Corporal. She held his gaze until he nodded. Then she straightened, turned back to the viewport, and stared at the burning dreadnoughts. 40 minutes now. Here's what's going to happen, she said, and her voice had changed. Not louder, quieter, the kind of quiet that made people lean in. We're going to respond to the Veth'kai. We're going to accept their terms. The silence on the deck was physical. Commander, Priya started. We're going to accept their terms, Yara repeated. And then we're going to do exactly what they don't understand we're capable of. Davo had stopped pulling at his knuckle, which is, she turned around. She was almost smiling. Almost. Lying. The Veth'kai had a problem that went back approximately 600 years, which was how long they'd been a spacefaring civilization, which was also roughly how long they'd been incapable of understanding deception. It wasn't a moral failing. It was biological. The Veth'kai perceived reality through a form of distributed sensory consensus. Their 3 primary processing organs functioned simultaneously and cross-verified everything in real time. Lying, for a Veth'kai, was physically similar to a human trying to consciously disagree with their own heartbeat. The concept existed in their histories as something primitive species had once engaged in, an evolutionary artifact, a curiosity. Fleet intelligence had known this for 11 years. Fleet Command had known it for 9. The information had been classified so aggressively that the analyst who'd written the original report, a woman named Dr. Cassandra Mweni, had been quietly reassigned to a deep space observatory on the far side of the Kala system, studying ice formations on a moon with no communications array. This was because the implications were considered destabilizing. If the Veth'kai couldn't detect lies, they also couldn't model them. Their military strategy, their treaty structures, their entire framework for dealing with other species was built on the assumption that all meaningful communication was honest. Not because they were naive, they were extraordinarily intelligent, but because the very concept of strategic deception existed for them the way color exists for the colorblind. The word was there. The idea was describable. But the actual experience of it? Absent. Fleet Command had sat on this and done nothing with it for 9 years because they were afraid. Yara Osei had sat on it for 6 months, since she'd pulled Dr. Mweni's original report from a server she technically wasn't authorized to access, because she'd been looking for something else and found it by accident, and because she was the kind of person who, once she understood something, couldn't unfind it. She had told no one. Until 40 minutes ago, apparently, someone had started broadcasting a signal on a frequency that only existed in Dr. Mweni's report. "I need the room," Yara said. Priya and Davo exchanged a look. Jean didn't look at anyone. He was the youngest, which meant he'd learned fastest that the commander's "I need the room" was not a request. When the deck cleared, she locked the door, a thing she had never done before, and pulled the signal through the main speakers. The rhythm was cleaner now that she wasn't filtering it through protocol channels. Underneath the pulse was a voice. It was fragmented, compressed to near nothing, but it was there. "Osei, if you're hearing this, you found the report. If you found the report, you know what to do. Station 7 needs to hold for 37 more minutes. Don't surrender. Don't fight. Just corruption. Static. The second wave isn't a second wave. Repeat. The second wave is more static. Then, clearly, they don't know you know." And then nothing. Yara stood very still for a long moment. Then she unlocked the door and said, loudly enough for the deck, "Get back to your stations." "Here's the problem with accepting their terms," she told the crew 4 minutes later. She'd written nothing down. She never wrote things down. It was a habit she developed young, when she'd understood that the most important things were the ones nobody expected you to remember. The terms include an immediate weapons lockdown. We power down every offensive system they board. They process us. We get folded into the continuance. She paused. That process takes approximately 6 hours. "And," Davo asked, "and we'll be unconscious for most of it." She met his eyes. "There's no version of accepting those terms where we remain us on the other side." The deck went quiet again, not the stunned quiet from before. This was a different kind. The kind that came after something had landed. Jean had both hands flat on his console. He was looking at the drawing of his dog. "So we don't accept," Priya said. It wasn't a question. "We accept," Yara said. "We just don't mean it." The Veth'kai response to the acceptance came through in 40 seconds, fast even by their standards. The reply was harmonically dense, which in their language indicated something close to relief. Satisfaction. A clean resolution of a problem. They transmitted boarding coordinates and a countdown sequence. 36 minutes. "Okay," Yara said. She cracked her knuckles, which was a thing she only did when she was building a plan in real time, which the crew knew, and which had the effect of making everyone on deck simultaneously more anxious and more settled, because it meant she was doing something instead of deciding whether to. "Davo, what's the real status of the weapons array?" 63%. The hit we took in the second engagement knocked out the portside cluster, but the forward batteries are. "Don't care about the forward batteries. What can we do that looks like nothing?" He blinked. Looks like nothing to whom? To a species that can't conceive of deception. He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then something changed in his face. The particular expression of someone whose mind had just made a jump it hadn't expected to make. "Oh," he said softly. "Yeah. Oh, that's... Don't be charmed by it, Davo. We have 36 minutes. He started pulling up the tactical overlay. The deep field resonance emitters. They're technically a navigational system. They've never been classified as weapons, because they're not. But if you reconfigure the harmonic output... I know what they do." Right. He was already working. The Veth'kai won't even register them as active, because to them they're not. Because to them, there's no reason they would be. He stopped, looked at her. We actually get to win because they're too smart to imagine we'd try this. We get to try to win, Yara corrected. There's a signal I need you to locate. It was on the long-range array at 0300, frequency Delta 79er, subharmonic band. Find its origin point. That'll take. You have 2 minutes. The rest of your time is the emitters. He turned back to his console without answering, which was Davo for understood. Priya came to stand beside Yara at the viewport. Can I ask you something personal? Priya said, No. How long have you known about the lying thing? Yara glanced at her sideways. 6 months. And you just... I sat on it, yes. Why? Yara looked back at the drifting wreckage. The fires had mostly died out now. Vacuum did that. Because the moment I told Fleet Command, it became a weapon. And weapons have a way of getting used before you've thought through what happens after. And now Fleet Command is gone, and we're 34 minutes from being kel'vorath, so the thinking through phase is unfortunately abbreviated. Priya was quiet for a moment. Is that why you volunteered for the station? 6 months ago. Yara didn't answer, because if you'd found the report and were sitting on it, and you knew the Veth'kai were making a move in this sector, then this posting wasn't a coincidence for you, was it? Still quiet. Commander, the signal, Yara said, came from someone who also found the report, or wrote the report, or both. She paused, and they said the second wave isn't a second wave. Priya processed that. Then what is it? I don't know yet, but it came from somewhere, and Davo's going to find where, and then I'm going to make a decision that I may not be able to take back. She finally turned to face her lieutenant. So yes, to answer your question from 30 seconds ago, I volunteered for the station, because someone had to be here who knew what I know, and who was willing to use it. Even if using it starts something bigger. Something bigger has already started, Priya. She turned back to the viewport. We're just the first ones who know it. Davo found the signal origin in 90 seconds, which was 30 seconds faster than he'd estimated, which was how you knew the news was bad. It's coming from inside the Veth'kai debris field, he said. Very flat, very careful. Specifically from what our sensors logged as destroyed Veth'kai hull section, registry 77 kel'vorath. That's one of the dreadnoughts we hit in the first engagement, Priya said. Yes, the one that went dark 4 hours ago. Yes, so the signal, Jean said slowly from her station, is coming from a destroyed enemy ship. From inside it, Davo clarified. Not the hull, the interior, which means someone is alive inside a ship we destroyed, Yara said. Someone who knows Dr. Mwani's report. Someone who is transmitting to us specifically on a frequency that only exists in classified human documents. She paused. On a Veth'kai vessel. The silence this time was very different. It had a texture to it, a kind of collective reorientation, like everyone on the deck simultaneously discovering that the floor they'd been standing on was not quite level. Human, Jean asked. I don't know, Yara said. If they're human and they're on a Veth'kai ship, I know what it means. Commander, that would mean. I know what it means, Jean. He stopped. Yara breathed in slowly. The implications stacked themselves in her head without being invited. Someone human, if they were human, aboard a Veth'kai command vessel. That wasn't a prisoner. The Veth'kai didn't take prisoners in the traditional sense. That was either a collaborator or a spy so deep that the words available for it were insufficient, or something else entirely. Something that didn't have a word yet. Can we get a voice channel? She asked. Not without revealing that we've located them. To the Veth'kai. To anyone monitoring the debris field. The signal is low power, masked. If we respond at any useful frequency, we light ourselves up and we light them up. She thought for exactly 11 seconds. Can we respond in kind? Low power, masked, same frequency. Theoretically, but our equipment isn't designed for. Davo. Give me 8 minutes. You have 5. And I still need those emitters ready. I have 2 hands, Commander. You have an entire specialist rating and 6 years of systems engineering. Davo, please don't make me feel sympathetic right now. He made a noise that was technically not a laugh, but lived in the same neighborhood. 24 minutes to the second wave. That was not a second wave. Jean had been quiet for a while. Yara noticed, the way she noticed everything, not by watching, but by a kind of peripheral awareness, a constant low-level read of the room. He had taken the drawing of his dog off the console and was holding it. She walked over to him, without making it obvious she was doing so. The way you approached a fire, you wanted to warm your hands at, without seeming like you needed the warmth. "What's the dog's name?" she asked. He looked up, slightly startled. "Biscuit. Good name. She's old." He looked back down at the drawing. It was actually quite good. Someone had real line control. She was already old when I shipped out. That was 14 months ago. So she's... He stopped. "She's probably fine," Yara said. "You don't know that." No, she didn't pretend she did. But she had 14 months before this, which she didn't have before that. That's not nothing. Jean was quiet for a moment. "Do you think what we're doing is going to work?" "I think it has a better chance than the alternative." "That's not a yes." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He nodded slowly, put the drawing back on the console, smoothed the tape at the corner where it had started to peel. "Can I tell you something that might be above my pay grade?" "You can tell me. I reserve the right to act like you didn't." "The surrender terms." He pulled up his console, angled it slightly toward her. "I've been going through the language, the actual translation, not the fleet summary. And there's a section." He pointed. "Here, line 19. She leaned in. Her face didn't change. She was very good at that. "That's not a reclassification clause," she said after a moment. "No, ma'am. That's a..." She paused, chose her words carefully. "That's a memory structure clause." "Yes, ma'am." They weren't planning to just incorporate us. She straightened. Her voice was still controlled. She was managing herself from the outside in, now too. "They were planning to reconstruct us," Jean said quietly. "The kel'vorath process is an assimilation. They take the biological pattern, they archive it, and they rebuild it with..." He stopped. "The word they use is corrected continuance. Like we'd be the same, but..." "Fixed," Yara said. "Yes, ma'am." She stood very still for several seconds. Outside, the debris drifted. "Good catch, Jean," she said finally. "Very good catch." She walked back to the center of the deck, and she did not show what she was feeling, which was a kind of cold, clarifying fury that she recognized from 3 previous moments in her life, moments that had each resulted in her doing something that couldn't be undone, that had cost her something she hadn't gotten back, and that she would do again without hesitation. "Davo," she said, 2 more minutes on the channel." "Make it 1. Commander." 1 minute, Davo. Please." A beat of silence, then keys moving faster. The channel opened with a sound like a wire under tension. Thin, fragile. Yara leaned toward the comm array and spoke in a low, very even voice. "This is Commander Yara Osei, Station 7. I found a report. I know what the second wave is." She paused. "Tell me I'm wrong." Static. 11 seconds. Then a voice. Human. Female. Older. Very tired. "You're not wrong. I'm Dr. Cassandra Mweni. I've been embedded in Veth'kai Operational Command for 14 months. The deck did not make a sound. The second wave is a processing fleet, not warships. The dreadnoughts with a door. The second wave walks through it. "Commander, the continuance isn't just moving into this sector. They've been studying human cognition for 6 years. The kel'vorath process they've developed for humans is not the standard incorporation protocol. They built something specific." A pause. "They're afraid of us. Not militarily. Existentially. They've run 412 simulations of long-term contact with humanity, and in every single one, by Generation 3, humans have fundamentally altered the continuance. Not by fighting, but static crackle, changing the way they think. Human cognitive patterns, introduced into the distributed network of Veth'kai consciousness, act like, she seemed to be searching for the word, like weather. They can't predict us. They can't contain us. Even our presence as a species is destabilizing to something that runs on certainty and consensus. So they're not absorbing us, Yara said. They're removing us. When he confirmed, the corrected continuance doesn't produce a human who thinks differently. It produces a biological human with a Veth'kai cognitive architecture. Everything that makes us us, the inconsistency, the irrationality, the lies, Yara said. Yes, gone. And they genuinely believe they're doing us a kindness. That's the part that, a pause that had something ragged in it. They truly believe disorder is suffering. They're not malicious. They're terrified, and they're fixing what frightens them, and they cannot conceive that the thing they're fixing might be the thing that makes us real. 20 minutes. The second wave, the processing fleet, was 20 minutes out. Dr. Mweni, Yara said, I need to know if you're intact. Physically, yes. My cover is still operational. I have access to their secondary coordination systems. Can you give me 12 minutes? A pause. To do what? To make them understand, Yara said, that they've made a significant tactical error. Another pause. Longer. They don't believe they can make errors. I know. Yara looked at Davo. He was ready. She looked at Priya. Priya gave a single, small nod, the kind that meant I don't fully understand this plan, and I'm with you anyway. She looked at Jean. He had his hands on his console. He was not holding the drawing. He was already working. She looked back at the debris field. Somewhere in there, a woman had been living inside an enemy fleet for 14 months, alone, holding a secret that was the exact size and shape of the future. Can you give me 12 minutes? Yara asked again, a sound that was not quite a laugh, something older and more broken than a laugh, but made of the same material. Commander, I've been giving you 6 years. Here's what the Veth'kai could not model. A species that would accept surrender, terms it had no intention of honoring. A species that would configure navigational equipment into a weapon, not because it had been designed to, but because someone in a desperate situation had looked at the available tools and thought, what if? A species in which a 22-year-old communication specialist, operating on approximately 4 hours of sleep, would notice a translation error in a legal document that 3 analysts at Fleet Command had missed, and would bring it to his commander without being asked. A species whose dead did not stay dead in the minds of the living, and whose living carried their dead like fuel. Here's what the Veth'kai command structure experienced in the 12 minutes that followed. Their boarding countdown reached 0, and the target station did not power down. Their secondary coordination systems, the ones they used to synchronize the processing fleet's approach, experienced a cascading interference pattern that their diagnostics could not categorize because the source was a navigational array operating outside every known weapons classification. 3 of their lead processing vessels lost positional synchronization and began a corrective maneuver that put them directly across the approach vector of the other 4, and inside the debris field of their own destroyed dreadnought, a signal began broadcasting, openly now, on every frequency. No longer low power, no longer masked, in Veth'kai harmonic language. The harmonics were perfect. The message was, I have been here for 14 months. I have recorded everything, and I would like to tell you something that your simulations could not predict. The Veth'kai command structure stopped. This was not a normal thing for the Veth'kai command structure to do. It ran on consensus and continuity, and stopping was not part of its operational logic. But the signal was coming from inside their own ship, from inside their own coordinates, from a pattern that their sensors registered as one of ours, and what was broadcasting was very clearly not one of theirs. In the 3 seconds it took them to resolve this contradiction, Davo completed the final reconfiguration. Ready, he said. Fire, Yara said. The deep field resonance emitters did what they had been redesigned to do. Across a spread of approximately 40,000 kilometers, the Veth'kai processing fleet experienced what would later be described in the after-action reports as a navigational reality disagreement, a state in which the sensor data each ship was receiving did not match the navigational consensus data it was sharing with the others. For species that ran on distributed sensory consensus, this was roughly equivalent to a human brain having two hemispheres that could no longer agree on what they were seeing. They didn't go dark. They didn't explode. They stopped. All 7 of them. Processing a contradiction they did not have the architecture to resolve. Yara got Dr. Mweni's voice back on channel 4 minutes later. That actually worked. Did you sound surprised just now? Genuinely, yes. I'm choosing to be offended. Commander, I've been alone for 14 months, and I still had more faith in this plan than the math warranted. How long do we have before they resolve the navigational conflict? Unknown. This is not a scenario they've modeled. A pause. That's the thing, isn't it? We keep ending up in scenarios they haven't modeled. It's what we do, Yara said, not proudly, just as a fact. I have their primary coordination key. When he said, I've had it for 3 weeks. I couldn't use it without a window, and there was no window. And then you. She stopped, restarted. If I broadcast the coordination key with the right header, the processing fleet's return to origin protocol activates. They go home, not because we beat them, because their own systems tell them to. Yara was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. That's using their own certainty against them, she said. Yes, they'll believe it's real. They have no framework for doubting a legitimate coordination signal. Because they don't lie. Because they don't lie. Yara thought about the word kel'vorath. She thought about corrected continuance. She thought about a species intelligent enough to run 400 simulations and wise enough to fear what they found, and yet completely unable to conceive of the thing that was about to beat them. She thought about Biscuit the dog, who was probably fine. Do it, she said. The processing fleet turned around 11 minutes later. Not destroyed, not defeated in any conventional sense. Just gone, recalled by a signal their own systems generated, authenticating a command that had been given by a human who had spent 14 months learning to think around the edges of a civilization that had never needed to think around any edges at all. The Veth'kai command dreadnought, the one that was not destroyed, the one carrying command authority for the entire engagement, went into what their behavioral analysts would later classify as an extended state of recalibration. This was, as far as anyone in human space could tell, the first time in 600 years the Veth'kai had needed to recalibrate anything. Davo was the first one to laugh. That IT wasn't a big laugh. It was the small, slightly hysterical laugh of someone whose nervous system had been at maximum tension for the better part of 3 hours and had just been given permission to relax without quite knowing how. He put his face in both hands. His shoulders shook. Sorry, he said, muffled. Don't apologize, Priya said. She was very deliberately not laughing, which was its own kind of laugh. Jean was not laughing. He was looking at the space where the processing fleet had been, which was now just space again. Regular space. Empty and cold and full of nothing alarming. They'll come back, he said. Yes, Yara agreed, with a framework for this. Eventually. And then we'll have thought of something else. She came to stand beside him. That's the thing they ran 400 simulations trying to predict, Jean. That's the thing they couldn't model. She paused. We don't solve problems. We make new ones. Smaller ones. Then smaller ones than those. We just keep subdividing the impossible until something manageable falls out. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a weird thing to be proud of. It's a weird species, she said. We contain multitudes. He smiled. Small. Real. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, once, like a period at the end of a sentence, and walked back to the center of the deck. Give me a line to Dr. Mweni, she said, and then I need someone to figure out how we're going to explain this to Fleet Command. Fleet Command is gone, Priya said. Then I need someone to figure out how we're going to explain this to whoever replaced them. She paused, which, if I'm being honest, is probably going to be the harder conversation. The channel to Mweni opened clean this time. No static, no interference, just the sound of a voice that had been speaking careful, Measured Veth'kai harmonic language for 14 months, and now, in the silence after the crisis, had gone very quiet. Are you all right? Yara asked. A long pause. I don't know yet, when he said. I've been not all right for a very long time, and I've gotten quite good at it. I'll have to figure out the alternative from scratch. That's fine. You have time. Do we? Yara looked at the viewport, the debris field, the cooling fires, the space where 7 processing ships had been turning around and going home to report something their command structure had no language for. Not as much as I'd like, she said, but more than we had 3 hours ago. Commander. Yes, the simulations they ran, 412. A pause. I read them, all of them, and in every single one, by Generation 3, humans had fundamentally altered continuance. You said that. Why, I didn't say. Mwini continued slowly. Is that in 207 of those simulations, the continuance survived it. Changed, but survived. Humans made them different, but they were still there. Yara processed that. And in the other 205, the continuance wasn't destroyed, Mwini said. It just, eventually, became something that chose to call itself something else. Silence. They weren't afraid of being conquered, Commander. They were afraid of becoming. Yara stood very still for a long time. Outside, the fires had gone out completely. The debris turned in the dark, slow and silent, lit only by starlight. There was something almost peaceful about it. The evidence of violence, hours old, becoming just objects in space. Just things. Just matter. Doing what matter did, indifferent to what it had once been part of. She thought about what it meant to be afraid of becoming. She thought about a civilization 600 years old that had run 400 simulations of its own future and found that future terrifying not because it ended, but because it changed. Not because humanity destroyed them, because humanity infected them with uncertainty, with inconsistency, with the ability to hold 2 contradictory thoughts and choose neither and instead invent a third. She thought about what that said about humanity. She thought about what that said about the Veth'kai. She thought, for just a moment, about what it might be like to be a species for whom the possibility of change was indistinguishable from the possibility of death, who had built a civilization so elegant and so coherent that the idea of becoming something different was genuinely, functionally, existentially horrifying. She thought about how lonely that must be. Dr. Mwini, she said. Yes, when you come aboard, and you are coming aboard, I'd like to discuss the 207. A pause. You mean the simulations where we changed them, but they survived? Yes, that's another pause longer. That's a very long conversation, Commander. We have more time than we had 3 hours ago, Yara said again. And Cassandra Mwini, who had been alone for 14 months, who had learned to think in harmonics and ratios, who had given 6 years of her life to a report that had been buried and a mission that had no name, laughed. A real laugh. Not small, not hysterical, just real, imperfect and human and unable to be predicted by any simulation any species had ever run. Yes, she said, I suppose we do. They got her off the wreck of the dreadnought 4 hours later. She was smaller than Yara had imagined. Most people were. She walked aboard Station 7 carrying almost nothing. A data chip, a translation journal, a photograph so worn it was barely an image anymore. She shook hands with Priya and nodded at Davo, and then stopped when she saw Jin's console. The drawing of the dog. She stared at it for a moment. Mine's named Ptolemy, she said. To no one in particular. To everyone. Jin looked up. Is he okay? I don't know. She touched the edge of the drawing, gently, without pressing. I haven't been able to ask. Biscuit's probably fine, Jin said. The commander said. When he looked at Yara, something passed between them. The look of 2 people who had both said things they weren't sure were true, because the alternative, a world where Biscuit was not fine, where Ptolemy was not okay, where the small ordinary things had not waited patiently for the people who loved them, was a world that was very hard to fight for and very easy to surrender to. Yes, when he said. She took her hand off the drawing. She straightened up. She's probably fine. Fleet Command, what remained of it, reorganized now under Admiral Chun, who had not been briefed on the classified report, and was therefore experiencing the events of the last 6 hours as something close to incomprehensible, opened a channel to Station 7 at 0800 station time. Admiral Chun was a precise, methodical man who had risen through command on the strength of his ability to understand what was actually happening as opposed to what appeared to be happening. He had been in command for 9 hours, which was 8 hours and 50 minutes longer than the previous administration. "Commander Osei," he said, "I have a report in front of me that says a single station held off a Veth'kai processing fleet using navigational equipment and a classified academic paper." "That's a fair summary, sir. I also have a secondary report that says the Veth'kai Command Dreadnought has been in a state of—" He paused to consult something. "What the analyst is calling systemic epistemic pause for the last 4 hours. Also accurate. And I have Dr. Cassandra Mwani's personnel file, which indicates she's been listed as missing, presumed dead, for 14 months, and yet I'm apparently looking at a live feed confirmation that she is currently aboard your station." "She's drinking coffee," Yara said. "She appears to be enjoying it considerably." A long pause from the Admiral. "Commander," he said finally, "I'm going to need a briefing." "Yes, sir. A full briefing. I understand. Starting with—" Another pause. A longer one. "Starting with why this information was classified in the first place, and what that classification has cost us." Yara looked at the viewport. The debris field was still there. It would be there for a while. There was a lot of it. "That's going to be a difficult conversation, Admiral." "I expect so." His voice had something complicated in it. Something that was trying to be anger and finding, underneath the anger, something more uncertain. "Is that going to be a problem?" "No, sir," Yara said. "We're very good at difficult conversations." She paused. "It's one of the things that makes us hard to predict." A beat. "I'll see you at 1200, Commander." "Sir." She paused. Couldn't help it. "Sir, one more thing." "Yes. The 207 simulations. I'll need access to them." Another long pause. She could hear him processing. "What," he said carefully, "are the 207 simulations?" And Yara Osei, commander of Station 7, standing on a deck that smelled of recycled air and coffee and burnt-out tension, looked at her crew. Davo with his engineering hands and his mathematics, Priya with her careful, controlled voice that had cracked exactly once in 3 hours, and not at all since, Jean with his drawing of a dog, who was probably fine, looked at them and found something in her chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, and was perhaps what you got when you mixed the two under pressure for long enough. "I'll explain at 1200, she said. "Clear your afternoon." Later, much later, when the reports had been filed and the investigations had been opened and the reclassifications had been made and the word kel'vorath had been entered into the official record with the annotation ceased to apply, a journalist writing the first full account of what was already being called the Station 7 incident would ask Dr. Cassandra Mwani a question. The question was, "What do you think the Veth'kai got wrong?" And Mwani would think about it for a long moment. She would look out the window of wherever she was. She would think about 412 simulations. She would think about 600 years of beautiful, coherent, certain civilization building toward a future that had no room for the thing it feared. And she would say, "They tried to predict us. That was the error. You can't simulate a species that surprises itself. They ran every possible model of what humans would do, and they were right about almost all of them. But they forgot that we also do the thing that makes no sense. The thing that doesn't help. The thing that costs us something we didn't have to give. They forgot that we do that on purpose. And that we call it." She would smile. "Small. Real. Being human." Cast and crew. Estimated runtime. 68 minutes. Recorded at Threshold Audio. Station 7 production. Sound design. Deep field resonance. Original score. No Veth'kai were harmed in making of this drama. Biscuit is fine.